Okay, I have two extremes here. This is practically brand new. Even though it was made in the 70s or 80s, it's hardly used at all, you can tell. It's very sturdy, has very sturdy paper. Whereas this poor old roll from the 1920s just didn't make it. And we don't want all of our rolls to be that way. Um, I noticed while I was playing some rolls that this end of the paper would cup. It would either buckle or cup, and as it was playing and especially rewinding. And I'm thinking that's not normal. This side wouldn't do that. This side was nice and snug, nice and flat all the way around. But the left end wasn't looking right, and so we analyzed the spool spindle ends on this end to see if there was a problem, and discovered that this spindle was tilted downward. I mean, ever so slightly, but it was tilted downward. And what I did was I pulled that apart to see if it was if it had some wear, if there was a worn out bushing or something. You can see the flange. And then I went out, I went out to the back shop, and on the shelf I found a similar style and pulled its spindle out. And it looks like if you look at it, well, is it worn out? Is the whole front worn down like that? But no, this little section right here on the tail end is machined thicker than the whole front end of that spindle to eliminate friction. So that sits in there like that. And there's a bushing here on the end, but the whole rest of that is hollow. It's completely hollow, the same size as this wider section on the end, that little wider section. So it just has a very small amount of clearance to move in there to allow that to move back and forth on the spring. But the whole front section, and you can see it mostly sticks out anyway, doesn't need to be that wide, so it doesn't give the slide action any friction. This is has the same exact clearances that one in there does. So I decided it didn't have that much wear, and it wasn't worth remachining or retrofitting something else in there because that was so wore out. That wasn't the case. It was just tilted. So I created a little spacer. I tried 18 thousandths of an inch index card paper, but that wasn't enough. And this is notebook back page type paper, and it's 22 or 24 thousandths right in there. And I made that to go on the top of the flange right there. It just goes on the top side. The bottom side is flat against the wood, and then the card spacer gives it the effect of tilting backwards so that the spindle can come up and make these two spools parallel, exactly parallel. Remember, I measured 18 thousandths of an inch paper. It still was measuring off, and so now the 22 to 24 thousandths paper, whatever that, I can't remember. It's around 22 thousandths of an inch paper. Makes those exactly parallel. And to figure that out, I'll show you. I took some damper flange cord and I wrapped it around the take-up spool. That goes all the way around the take-up spool. We're going to pull that snug. Pull it snug. Not pull on it, but just make sure it's snug, tight, and not loose. And then I came around and I measured to there, made a mark, and I measured on both sides, and this side originally was 1/4 of an inch longer. See if you can see this mark right here. Yeah, those are the two marks right there, and they're 1/4 of an inch apart. The one side was longer than the other, and now they measure exactly the same. When I take that measurement, they're exactly the same, so now I know they're parallel. When we put one of these antique, when we put one of these antique rolls on there, we want to make sure that as it's rolling backwards, especially when this is going a little bit faster than normal, You might be able to slow that down, but in this piano, I'm not doing that. It's doable. We just want to make sure it's straight, because the paper used to track to the left and jump up on the spool, or at least try to. So we have a couple of rolls that have a little bit of a tear there that we've had to repair, and the rest of them we're not gonna have that problem, hopefully. Okay, so I just noted that this came out of the box just like that. And as I went, this fell off. So over the years, somebody may have dropped it and not noticed that it was cracked and that maybe it didn't fall off. But since then, since those days, it has fallen off. And when that happens, I'm going to pull that off. I'm going to hold the paper tight, and pull this off. Okay, like that. You can see in there that the crack is not clean, and any lip like that is going to just rip the edges of an old roll of paper. This is too frail. So if you decide to glue and repair that, it would have to be sanded completely level, so there's no wobble, and completely smooth, so there's no lips anywhere. And that's pretty tough to do. It's almost easier sometimes just to get a new one, or borrow the same size spool end from another roll while you play this roll. Okay. The left end of this one was okay, but the right one had been replaced with a QRS take-up. Okay, so the paper is aligned to the right side, all the way to the right side. And then in this case, these old rolls have been shoved into the piano hundreds of times over the last, they've been shoved up into the piano hundreds of times over the last 100 years. And what that does is it wears this hole out right there inside the spool core. And it also might compress the paper on this end, or squish the paper, or whatever, if it does. And what it'll do is it will lessen the distance between the inside of the spool ends and make a very tight space for this paper to sit. And so when it re-rolls, trying to get back in that space is difficult for those old pianos. So in this case, I put just one wrap of tape around, not quite one wrap of tape around the spool end on the inside, because when I first pulled this out of the box, this just fell out in my hand. It wouldn't stay in there. It would just want to fall out. It was so loose. So it needs to be snug. It has to be aligned and stay there. Where it was as loose as it was, it would wobble. It would go like that inside while it was playing, and that can't happen either. It has to be complete, especially where it's pushed up by the spring up tight against the paper. So this is very snug, and what I can do is hold the paper tight against the drive end, and then push this in so we have, maybe not a 1/16 of an inch gap, but some sort of a gap there that just gives the paper a space to rewind. I'm going to take this spool out. This is one of our 100-year-old rolls. We don't want it to look like that someday. Okay, so with this loaded, you see the paper isn't over again. This is a bad example here. Let me do this again, because this isn't right. All of the paper is about a 1/16 of an inch off of the spool. Now I can see that now that it's loaded in the spool box. I want one where the paper is right up against the spool on the right end. All right, this is one of our 1926 songs. Just a little longer, so that's almost 100 years old in 2024. Let's pull that forward so we can see how it's aligning to the tracker holes. You can see a tracker hole. This is like a standard system, auto piano style. standard. It's got 2 holes there and 2 holes here. And the alignment looks really good from this standpoint, from that standpoint. The paper is all the way to the right. That's good. And we don't have a lot of gap there, so I want to make just barely enough gap that we're not stressing for space, the amount of space between the ends for the paper. Okay, so I took a narrow piece. I actually sliced a piece of painter's tape so that it's probably just over 1/4 of an inch. And I couldn't put it on the tip because if I put it on the tip on this end, then it would be too tight to push it all the way in. So I pulled it back, and now because the spool end was not loose enough to fall out, but it wasn't loose enough to stay there, meaning we could have wobble. It wouldn't be staying in the same position is what I mean. So I'm going to place that back in here and come back. Okay. So you can see the white of the keys between the paper and the spool end. There's just barely a gap. And now it's tight and it won't move, but I gave it just a slight amount of space, increasing the space between the spool ends for these old rolls, just in case. Remember, I want it to track tight against the right, but I'm giving it just barely any space at all. It's like a knife blades, a razor blades distance, 32nd of an inch or so. That's up to you. You experiment if you want 1/16 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch. If you want plenty of room, that's up to you, but you need to experiment to see how your piano tracks the paper. Okay, the next thing I've done is I put the roll in the spool box and verified that we're evenly spaced on the tracker bar holes. See that? You can just barely see it. That's a good thing. I smashed my finger, sorry. Fingernail's not very pretty. Evenly spaced there, and now we're going to try to play the roll. And what it'll do is I've never played this song roll, so because of that, I want to play it on a very low speed down here and watch to make sure that the paper stays against the right spool end. I don't want it going back and forth the first time it plays. I'll just play slowly and make sure the paper is tracked to the right end, and then we'll rewind it, making certain that it stays to the right end, that there aren't problems with this roll before we play it again in the proper speed. And that will ensure that this roll will last for more years of good music. All right, I think we've had, I don't know if I mentioned, but I loosened this screw on the brake for rewind because a 100-year-old roll doesn't need any stress. The brake makes this paper very tight, and that can cause problems. If you want to loosen it a lot or loosen a little bit, you'll find that it might help with this. Another thing you need to do to make sure that we're not jumping, because jumping makes that paper, and what causes jumping is loose chains or unevenness in the wind motor. These chains have to run very, very smooth. You can't see the chain jumping up and down, or that's going to cause this to jump up and down, and that's going to cause the paper to want to jump up on the spool ends. All right, I think we should be safe with these old rolls. And I was just going to show, I don't have very many weld minion rolls. There's a few. This homemade cabinet I brought home 4 or 5 years ago with, I didn't count, but there's a number of welt minion rolls in there. You see some old ones. And then a few of the 1970 and 80s AMR publishing rolls. We have a couple of those. But most of these are original. I don't have very many. They're not like the 2,000 or 3,000 QRS rolls that I have, or the close to, I don't know, somewhere between 700 and 1,000 Ampco rolls. It's not that I have to take very good care of these, because if I ever work on another welt minion like I am for this lady, then we'll at least have something to test the piano with. And the music is enjoyable. Some of the rolls are very nice. Very good.